Welcome to FYI, the For-Your Innovation podcast. This show offers an intellectual discussion on technologically enabled disruption, because investing in innovation starts with understanding it. To learn more, visit arc-invest.com.
ARK Invest is a registered investment advisor focused on investing in disruptive innovation. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions. It does not constitute, either explicitly or implicitly, any provision of services or products by ARK. All statements made regarding companies or securities are strictly beliefs and points of view held by ARK or podcast guests, and are not endorsements or recommendations by ARK to buy, sell, or hold any security. Clients of ARK Investment Management may maintain positions in the securities discussed in this podcast.
Welcome to the Bitcoin Brainstorm. Alongside my co-host Yassine Almandra, analyst at ARK Invest, I'm your host Roudi, co-founder of Bitcoin Park, a community-supported campus here in Nashville, Tennessee, focused on grassroots Bitcoin adoption and a home for Bitcoiners to work, learn, collaborate, and build. We are now on episode number 5, and if this is your first time tuning in, here is our idea. Thanks again to the support from Cathie, Yassine, and the ARK team. We are taking our monthly Bitcoin topic-based approach at Bitcoin Park and applying it to this new monthly podcast series we are calling Bitcoin Brainstorm. Each month, we plan to have a different topic and invite amazing people from a variety of areas within the Bitcoin community. Our aim is simple: drive conversation around Bitcoin. And after going deep into Bitcoin with the first 4 episodes, building and scaling, AI and Bitcoin, some of the misconceptions associated with Bitcoin, and using Bitcoin, we are now here today with a very important topic, one that is near and dear to us all: funding and supporting Bitcoin and open source development. So we have approximately 60 minutes and we'll be covering a lot of ground. Let's do some quick introductions for everyone and then jump right in. Let's first start with Lisa, also known as NiftyNei online. Welcome, Lisa.
Hey, Rod. Thanks for having me on this week. It's a really excited to be here. I'm Lisa. I've been working in Bitcoin for a little over 5 years now. Started on open source dev kind of over in the lightning side of the ecosystem. These days, I still do open source contributions, but I also run a conference series for Bitcoin developers called Bitcoin++. And I do technical engineering focused classes on Bitcoin protocols at a project called Base 58.
Wow, welcome. That's exciting. I can't wait for you to be back in Nashville. Next, a key contributor to the BitcoinDevKit project, Steve Myers.
Yep. Hi, I'm Steve Myers, and I'm a open source contributor. I got started about 2-3 years ago as an early contributor on the BitcoinDevKit, which is a software library written in Rust, the Rust language, that provides all the pieces you need to build a Bitcoin on-chain wallet. And it also supports language binding. So if you're building a mobile wallet in Kotlin or Swift, we support that also. And then when I got started in that, we were funded from various sources: Brink, Spiral, Bitfinex, some other places. And as a way to keep the project, the idea with having a library like BDK is that you don't want every project to reinvent the core, software you need to make a Bitcoin wallet. So it has to be open source. It has to be, standards compliant. It has to, provide all the basic features. So that's what the BitcoinDevKit does. But you also want that to be a sustainable project. You want it to be something that, a project that's going to be building on it knows is going to be around in 5 or 10 years. And has a active and robust development community supporting it. So this year, as Rod mentioned, or maybe didn't mention yet, we started the BitcoinDevKit Foundation, which is a nonprofit organization set up to collect donations, help support our developers, help build a community, recruit, document all those things you need to make a sustainable open source project. So, excited for this conversation.
Man, so exciting. It's a pleasure to have you, Steve. And you did mention Brink, which is a great segue to Mr. Mike Schmidt.
Hey, all. Mike Schmidt. I'm executive director at an organization named Brink. Brink is a non-for-profit charity with 501c3 status in the United States. And we've been around 3 years now. Hard to believe it's already been 3 years. And our mission is to support Bitcoin development. And the main way we do that is through our grants program. So currently we're funding 8 developers. Most of those are full-time, working on Bitcoin open source. And these are the developers that are working on building Bitcoin, the software itself. So not building something on top of Bitcoin, which is great, but actually the Bitcoin core software that runs much of the Bitcoin network itself. And in addition to our grants program, we also have some educational initiatives that we try to help educate the community on a variety of topics, mostly on the tech side of things. We help run Bitcoin Optech, which is a weekly newsletter. We have a weekly podcast as well. We've done in-person workshops with Bitcoin businesses to keep connectivity between the developers and Bitcoin businesses open. Some of our grantees also run something called Bitcoin Core PR Review Club, which is a periodic meeting of developers, perhaps more on the junior side of things, that want to see how would a more senior person look at this particular proposed change to the code base. And our grantees facilitate those meetings monthly. And we also have some grantees that are mentors. So through Summer of Bitcoin program and also through the Kala program. And then I spend some of my time when I'm not doing those things, also organizing some of the in-person Bitcoin developer meetups that happen a couple times a year. And as a charity, our sole source of funding is support from the community, whether that's a business or an individual. So this is a topic that's obviously very near and dear to my heart. So thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. And I got to take a quick tangent here because you mentioned Summer of Bitcoin. Steve Myers, can you tell a quick story about our student here at Vanderbilt that learned about Bitcoin and then applied to the Summer of Bitcoin program?
Yeah, sure. So, one of the things various folks on the BDK project do are, we participate in the Summer Bitcoin project. And this last summer, we have a Bit Devs we do in Nashville at Bitcoin Park. And one of the folks who came from the Nashville community, that one of the Nashville students stopped by and told him about Summer Bitcoin, said he should apply. So he applied, and he did a really great project with built on top of Bitcoin. I guess like sort of an example with BitcoinDevKit and PayJoin to add that kind of PayJoin functionality and show how that could be done with BDK. So yeah, just a student who I think probably didn't know a lot about Bitcoin going in, but was very interested in the privacy aspects of it. So we gave him that, and yeah, he did a great job.
And you had to apply. It wasn't like you just got accepted. I don't know how many thousands of people have applied to this program.
Yeah, they got a lot of applications, and unfortunately, we don't actually get as many American applicants. But so it's great to see a student, a local student that's got the skills and wants to apply and spend their summer doing that. So it's a great experience for him, I think.
And thanks again, Mike. And let's go over to the gentleman who was kind enough to co-organize and lead Nosterville, hosted here at Bitcoin Park just a couple of weeks ago, a core contributor to the BTCPay server project, Rockstar Dev.
Yeah, hey everyone. What can I do when I love people so much? So when they ask me to participate in co-organizing conferences, I just can't say no. And not only you, Rod, but then Nostrica, Nostrasia, this Nostr.world conferences that Jack Dorsey supports. Yeah, I'm also organizer of that. But beyond just helping organize conferences, yeah, I'm a cypherpunk, I'm a Bitcoiner, FOSS advocate. Most of my reputation in the space comes from the fact that I was a first contributor on BTCPay server back in 2017, joined Nicolas Dorier when he declared that he will obsolete BitPay after they raised $60 million from Bitmain and others. I have propensity for crazy missions. See? 2 years later, then I joined Strike with Jack Mallers, coded the whole backend there, built the engineering team, spent over 4 years as a VP of engineering at Strike. And these days, I'm mostly back in FOSS, organizing conferences, advising some companies, some VC funds, and yeah, doing everything I can do to help usher hyper Bitcoinization faster. So yeah, that's me.
Well, my friend, we appreciate you being here, and we're excited for you to join this brainstorm. And one of the many unsung heroes in the Bitcoin space, and has become a friend of mine, Conor Okus with Spiral.
Hey, how's it going? Thanks for having me. Excited to be here. So yeah, my name's Conor. I'm a product manager at Spiral. Spiral's an initiative within Block, and we aim to support free and open source Bitcoin developers, designers, and PMs, and just the wider Bitcoin ecosystem in general. We do it in a number of different ways. One of them is our grant program. So our grant program has been running for about 4 years now, and we've given out over 60 grants to builders in the space. We're currently supporting maybe 36, maybe a bit more, developers, designers, some PMs. And they're all geographically dispersed as well across 20 plus different countries as well. So we're really proud of that footprint. We also have a full-time team of engineers who are working on a Lightning implementation called LDK, which is a Lightning implementation packaged as a SDK designed to help developers implement Lightning into their applications in many different environments and as simple way as possible. We also have a creative edge to us as well. So we do things such as Here Comes Bitcoin, which was an initiative to help beginners understand what Bitcoin's all about, but in a fun and playful way. We've done a documentary for LDK and SDK as well to shed some light on that. We love puppets. We're big fans of puppets. So if you follow our work, you'll see a lot of puppet imagery around. So yeah, it's really fun to work at Spiral, really fun to be part of the Bitcoin ecosystem. And thank you for having me.
I love how understated all of you guys are. Like the accomplishments are so freaking amazing. And I love the puppet video. Michael, just as like a reminder, we need to include this in the show notes. A number of links from what Conor and the team created. Thanks again for being here, Conor. And always, Cathie Wood, founder, CEO, and CIO at ARK Invest. Welcome, Cathie.
Thank you, Rod. Thank you for inviting me once again.
Absolutely. So I think maybe I can ask you a question just to tee up the conversation and then get it to the broader group, Cathie. And Yassine, if you want to jump in as well. And I think it's a simple one. Can you share a little bit about why ARK Invest is interested in Bitcoin and open source development? And how does this align with your overall strategy and philosophy?
Okay. Well, I watched, as I was growing up in the investment business, I watched open source evolve as a thing. And in our world, in the traditional financial world at the time, it was very difficult for people to understand what the heck is this? Because, of course, all of our companies are earning profits, and that's, our projections are all around profitability, and they just couldn't even fathom. And when I decided that I needed to get out of that world, and it wasn't for that reason, but there was groupthink. There was, everyone doing things the same way, benchmark sensitivity, letting others determine with benchmarks what would go into a portfolio. I said, I am out and need to start a company that will be much more open to ideas from the rest of the world, and a company focused only on disruptive innovation, which because of the tech and telecom bust, and even more so after 0809, nobody really wanted to go there anymore. Maybe that's a bit of an exaggeration, but not too much of an exaggeration. And I decided that inspired by the open source movement, watching what had happened with the Linux Foundation, how that was, that really led to the boom in data centers that we have now, which has enabled AI and all of that. I said, how could we adopt that to ARK? And so we open sourced our research ecosystem, which again, in the rest of the world, people thought was nuts. Like, why are you giving your secret sauce away, your research? That might have been a good question when I started in the business, late 70s, early 80s, when information was very difficult to get, very expensive to get. And, the secret sauce was, okay, how can we gather this information? Now information is prolific. And the question is, how do you pull it all together? So we give our research away and we get so much more back from that. We get information, not inside information. We get information from, developers, people out there innovating. They want us to be successful. We're sizing markets and helping them. They're helping us battle test our assumptions. So the give and take is phenomenal, so much better than I ever dreamed. So I've seen open source work. I mentioned Linux and all of the other open source strategies. And Bitcoin was very natural, therefore, for me and us as we were looking at this new technology, this new monetary system. It was a natural, it was a beautiful thing, and we embraced it very early. Gave our clients their first exposure to Bitcoin in 2015. Fast forward to today, and it is interesting. We're doing Bitcoin Brainstorm this week when there's been all this drama around OpenAI. And we've been focused on AI, open source versus closed ecosystems, and we're measuring the progress of each. We're putting out some great charts in our Big Ideas 2024. And what we're noticing in this world of generative AI and large language models, the closed ecosystem is moving forward very rapidly, but the open source ecosystem is moving ahead even more rapidly. Now, open source in terms of performance in generative AI, large language models, is behind GPT-4, but its rate of improvement is faster than the closed ecosystem. So watching the drama around OpenAI, I'd love to open this up and hear what everybody thinks. Just what reinforced my conviction is, how can we let this centralized group of individuals with these egos that clearly almost blew this thing up and maybe in many ways has blown it up, how could we let that group, and now they're all back together, maybe, it's like so unstable. And as Yassine mentioned in the early days, when I tried to explain to people why I loved open source, I said, look, it's like a giant neighborhood watch. Why are everyone's watching it? It might involve their livelihoods, it might involve their reputations, but they all have this common interest. And the decentralization is a beautiful thing. You don't get into, you get some skirmishes, but nothing like we just saw at OpenAI. So I'd love to actually, since that has just happened, just get everybody else's point of view on what they think is going to happen now in the AI realm. And then maybe, of course, we'll go directly into Bitcoin.
Yeah, and I think that's a great cultural question, right? Open versus closed. It's like we could talk definitely on the AI front, and we could definitely jam on that. But I think you nailed it with, it's kind of core. Why work in, there's an incentive to work in closed source, privatization to profits and so on, which I'm not knocking. It's just, that's a different course. But in this technological innovation area, especially on the disruption side, I'm curious, and maybe just to modify the open question, and then I'd like to pass it to Steve first, and then give it to everyone else. Like, why work in open source out of all the things to be working on?
I can start. So most of my career has been in closed source. I worked in enterprise software, financial software, some telecom, and then when I made the switch a few years ago to work 100% in open source, the level of the review and the quality, and like everybody's reputation is out there, like you said, in public. Like everybody, is reviewing everybody else's code. There's huge incentives to improve the quality and not to rush stuff out. Sometimes people complain that maybe things move slower in open source, but in reality, they're moving much faster in terms of actual delivered high quality software. And core really sets the bar for this, but all the open source projects I've seen in Bitcoin and around Bitcoin are just, phenomenally talented people working on this in the open, sharing all of their conversations. And you don't get that on a closed source project. Like, at least from my experience in closed source, oftentimes it'll be, we have some marketing deadline coming up, or we have some very big customer that needs something. And sometimes things get pushed out a little sooner than they should. I've never seen that happen in open source. It couldn't happen in open source. It's the contributors who drive the schedule, and really take pride in that quality of the product. So yeah, it's a very different thing. And just also on the security point of view, we're talking about this Bitcoin, specifically enlightening. This is software that has a lot of money riding on it. So what Mike's group is, what Mike's grantees and stuff are doing is it's protecting billions of dollars in financial assets. So anything Bitcoin related needs to have that review just to be trusted to use it on a program. Use it if you're going to build a company around something. You want to be able to audit it yourself, and you can't do that with closed source. And I remember the days when TCP/IP software used to be closed source and you had to pay for it. And then Linux came around and it was all open source. Everybody could audit it. Everybody could improve it. And, that's when the internet took off, I think. So
I would jump in there to say that certain technologies are impossible without open source. And I certainly think Bitcoin would be impossible if it wasn't open source, because who would use that as money? As for AI, as everyone else, I'm enjoying drama on Twitter or X or whatever it's called nowadays. And I watched a lot of Ilya's videos, and he has that interesting perspective in a sense that closed source AI will always be ahead of open source AI. And I kind of agree with that stance, because when it comes to closed source, what OpenAI is that's not open company. That's not nonprofit. It's literally a company where you have collected all these best AI researchers, and they're working on closed source product, and then results of their work are slowly trickling out. I do think that OpenAI is going to catch up, but as long as you have so much money and resources and talent being concentrated in single location, you're going to see what is the difference and advantage between closed source AI and open source AI. And really, as us cypherpunks say, information wants to be free. And that's how I see the whole drama in OpenAI, is they just have too much power concentrated in there, and everyone is probably ego is starting to get in the way, where everyone thinks that their decision is deciding the fate of the world. And this is where open source really comes as a salvation, in a sense. Okay, open source parts of your stack you're comfortable with, your can be improved by others, and then the rest of the world, the rest of developers, the rest of the community can join in and help develop. Because open source, to me, it is about technology, but it's also about people. I look at everyone on this call, and to me, the biggest thing that open source has done to me is developed me as a human and connected me with other great humans that are working on, Lisa, for example, what she does in educating, new developers and getting them interested in Bitcoin is amazing. And, I'm also Lisa tweet enjoyer, right, Lisa? So yeah, that's the best part of open source when it comes to me.
Yeah, Rockstar, you mentioned something that got me thinking in terms of the profundity of open source. It seems like the more important the application, the more important it is for it to be open source. Where I think about something like Bitcoin, it's like Bitcoin could have never possibly thrived in the way that it has if it, let's say, just started closed source or was closed source by default. And so one, I think it points to just how profound Bitcoin is as trying to be this new money in which open source needs to be the default. But now we're starting to see with other applications that are perhaps, as profound or increasing in profundity, that there is this question of, should we have started, closed source versus open source? Or now that we have all of this power and now that the implications are as profound as we realize it to be, the egos are starting to get in the way. And so I think that that's like a really interesting dynamic that we don't really appreciate because of how Bitcoin evolved in this sort of grassroots organic movement. It wasn't like we are going to fund an open source initiative, $100 million, and then we're going to have, let's say, a fallout between an Elon Musk and a Sam Altman. And then Sam is going to think about, should we do for profit and should we start charging $20 a month? And then the board is going to get fired. But these are all things that are obvious in hindsight. But it points to I think it points to really how irreplicable something like Bitcoin is. And thankfully, Bitcoin is solving what I think to be the most profound application, which is, an independent money. But I mean, that's an interesting dynamic that I don't think we could have necessarily foreshadowed.
And then you also start thinking about what Satoshi did, in a sense, walking away from that much essentially value and money. But yeah, I don't want to hog the mic. I want to hear others on this topic because I think, yeah.
Can I just ask one question then, Rockstar? Is I understand why the closed ecosystem is working right now in this realm in generative AI. Open source is moving faster. The reason they say they went for profit, at least capped for profit, was GPUs and costs like that. What's the analogy here? First of all, do you when you say you think closed in that realm is probably going to win, I'm not so sure of that. Maybe I'm just too biased here in terms of how important that movement is too, and how important it is not to let a centralized few dominate, that project.
I mean, I'm very glad that you're biased towards open source way because that's definitely how I see that future will be better. Because if we do end up with closed source AIs that few control, like those people, entities, they're going to dominate everyone else. And really, when I look at the paradox of open source, I think most of it and why it's advancing so fast, as you say, is the cross pollination. It's like when you are part of open source system, you get to work with really anyone, and this is where a lot of people on this call, we collaborate in different ways on different topics, and that's what makes each one of us better and develops us. So that's where I do see, as open source AI catches up with chat GPT, there there will be potential to overtake. But as long as you have these closed entities where you can collect the best AI researchers in the world, and they coalesce into this small group through which they work tightly together, there will be some small advantage. And it's not that I want that to win. That's just where I agree with Ilya as one of the leading AI researcher. It's all about that cross pollination, because that's why Linux won. It's just anyone could have contributed, and then people started combining ideas, and closed source doesn't matter in that sense, because by the time you want to do anything, it's already too late. Information and that cross pollination collaboration between researchers got Linux so far ahead that now Windows will never catch up.
There used to be a day when nobody thought you could compete with IBM, Sun Microsystems, Microsoft, the big mainframe, enterprise server platforms. And then it all became Linux. How did Linux catch up? It was this open ecosystem. They just, just kept grinding and just kept improving. And just every good idea that was out there in the closed source world, they just re-implemented it and did it better and cheaper and faster in the long run, getting it delivered. So yeah, I don't know much about AI, but I do know open source. That's how it does it. Like it takes passionate people. They whatever they want, they just build it. And yeah, it might take a little longer initially, but once that base is there and that framework is there, I think things move pretty fast. So maybe that'll happen in AI, but it's definitely happening in Bitcoin.
There's a trust factor here as well, right? Like one of the reasons that a money like Bitcoin, a digital asset that's built on top of code, needs to have the code available is because you can then have a higher degree of trust with it. For example, if it was launched as a decentralized but closed source project, people may think that, hey, this is very cool, but at some point there would be an issue with trust because you don't exactly know what's going on behind the scenes. And there may be, I'm AI newbie, so I can't opine to it, but there may be similarities there where sort of these iterations of AI have come out that are doing cool things, but at some point trust is going to matter. And am I getting the right results, if you will? Am I getting an unbiased answer? And that trust may come into play in a closed source AI system.
I think that's a great point, Mike. I think that's ultimately the way to reconcile both points of view, is that we like to, in the Bitcoin world, talk about time preference, right? Closed source is a very high time preference approach, whereas open source is a very low time preference. In the short term, the ability to, let's say, bootstrap, to efficiently allocate resources, to, let's say, support something like GPUs, closed source could win out, right? Because it's like you basically are able to marshal the financial resources to do that. But in the long term, ultimately you have a breaking point where it works until it doesn't. And then when it doesn't, everything either completely collapses or there's just a massive monopoly where it becomes completely unusable. And so I think that, kind of, Cathie, to your point, is that I think the long-term sustainability of open source feels much more realistic than the long-term sustainability of closed source, even if at the onset, like, a closed source might win out. And I think that I see that with kind of the crypto or Bitcoin world as well, where it's like everyone thinks Bitcoin is moving at a slower pace of innovation and that there's not much development. And yet it's able to be as resilient as it has been for this exact reason, is because it is uncompromisingly open source. And so we're starting to see the fruits of that only after the fact.
Actually, I want to bring up a little topic you mentioned, long-term sustainability. And I think that's kind of one of the topics we have today and really applies to Bitcoin Core and any Bitcoin open source project. That how do you make it? It's still a very new project. We're like at 15 years old. How do you make it long-term sustainable? How do you, and it's a bit different than, say, something like Linux, where you can have all these enterprises supporting it and customizing it for their needs, but you don't want to centralize the funding and control of something like Bitcoin. Like that would be something that maybe in Linux they can get away with some sort of centralization, but not in Bitcoin. So I don't know, like, what you guys think about how do you make that long-term sustainable, long-term funded, but not centrally controlled in a foundation model.
I have some thoughts on it because I'm sort of two minds.
Mike, as you share your thoughts, if you could just set up for the audience, like, how Bitcoin has a really unique funding model that relies on community support, and just the kind of importance of recognizing that across the stakeholders, I think is really important.
I'll give a quick whirlwind tour of my perspective of how open source and Bitcoin has evolved. Obviously Satoshi, there's sort of these two pieces. There's someone is donating their time in working on this, or someone is donating money so that someone can spend time working on this. And at the very beginning of the project, you had Satoshi donating his time to work on this project. And even through, I think, 2012, it was purely volunteers working on this, donating in the form of their time, until you had the Bitcoin Foundation come and I think Gavin Andreessen was the first person who actually got paid money to work full-time on Bitcoin in 2012. And ever since then, it's been sort of a slow climb of less people putting their time in as a donation and more people donating money so that people can get paid to work on the project. So we've sort of seen that slider go from 100% time donation to somewhere in the middle now, where some people are donating their time and some people are donating money. And to the topic of being able to do funding in a sustainable way. Yeah, as the executive director of Brink, I would love to have a pile of Satoshi's coins and we just work off of them. That would be great. But the fact is, and we've just talked about this with the centralization of, OpenAI and things like that, that things can go wrong and centralization is bad. So I think what I'm interested in is a funding model. Obviously, ideally, you'd have something like 1 million people giving in a couple dollars a year kind of thing. That is just probably not going to happen as much as we'd like it to. But the more that we can spread out the funding over different organizations and individuals, the better. And the more that we can make that be done in a sustainable, recurring way, the better. Because at the end of the day, we want sustainable funding so that we can have sustainable development talent working on the project, and they can dedicate their time and decide, well, this is going to be around for more than a year, so maybe I do want to leave my Amazon job or my Google job and do this. So you want to have the sustainable funding match the sustainable development behind the scenes.
That's a great setup. I mean, I think my view on this is ultimately stakeholders in whatever form they come with Bitcoin, whether you're a holder, whether you're an investor, whether you're building on top of it, almost have a duty to figure out a way to sustain that model. And I think, Conor, you're almost the perfect person to talk about this, because in many ways, that's exactly what Block realized with Spiral. Can you talk a little bit about that dynamic and how that's being applied?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's many large companies that use open source software in many different ways, and some are eager to contribute back to that ecosystem more than others. I think it's no secret that, Jack Dorsey is a bigger proponent of Bitcoin. And when Spiral was started 3-4 years ago now, the question was asked, what can Block do, Square at the time, what can be done to, contribute and give back to the community? And one of the ways to do that is to pay people to make Bitcoin, free open source software better. And so for us, we're predominantly focused on Bitcoin Core, which is the catalyst for this Bitcoin movement that we see. But Bitcoin at this point is very much a large ecosystem of many different projects. So you have Bitcoin Core itself, then you have stuff like Steve works on, like BDK and software development kits. And now you've got layer 2 stuff with Lightning, and you've got different types of infrastructure projects, different research projects. We even have design focused efforts as well with the Bitcoin design community, which maybe we can talk to a little bit later. But I think Block's model is interesting in that for a very small percentage of your research budget, you can have a very strong impact on open source, but also have that align with many of your business goals. So Block's main objective is financial empowerment, and what better technology to align yourself with in-house to be kind of at the forefront of that technology and innovation. And we don't, as our team, have any specific business motive, but much of what we produce has been used by Block or teams within Block, Cash App specifically, and they've been able to arrive at decisions to use the software that we're creating and the software we contribute to independently, which is also important. So that is one model, where you have a large organization who commit a small percentage of their research budget to contributing back to Bitcoin specifically. But I think the longer term trend is that we want to see more spirals, we want to see more Brinks, we want to see more foundations being developed, and we want projects and individuals to be multi-entity funded. So no one project is reliant on any single organization. And I think we're in a time where the trajectory is definitely up and to the right with regards to funding for Bitcoin. If anything, our issue or problem is allocating those funds efficiently. I'd say the more the merrier, really.
Totally. And Conor, you reminded me of the a framework for sustainable open source Bitcoin development that you wrote maybe even a year or two ago, which is spot on. We should definitely include in the show notes. I'm going to ask Lisa a quick question, but Bitkey, which by the way, Spiral is separate of Block and Square, and it's a separate entity funded on its own. It has no bearing on any of Square. But Bitkey is a wallet that the Square Group is developing, correct? Raise your hand if your project is the foundation layer of the Bitkey wallet.
Well, BDK, they chose BDK. Well, actually, Mike should raise his hand too, because it's built on Bitcoin on chain. And the actual mobile library and server-based library they're using uses BDK. And of course, BDK talks to Core. And they're building something completely innovative in terms of a mobile multi-sig shared custody, not really shared custody. So it's a self-custody model with a backup key, one of the three backup keys held by the provider, but in this case, the Bitkey team. So it's another of those examples too, where
I was fortunate enough to be part of the beta.
Very nice.
Right here. And I went through the entire process flow, and it's remarkable how well it works. And the whole idea of collaborative custody and multi-sig at the retail level is going to be incredible. So this right here is actually your fingerprint. That's the way to authenticate the first, and then you have your phone, and then Block holds the third of three.
It's a game changer, I think. And this is where, the research that Spiral has been funding, is directly feeding into that product that they're going to be using. And as I understand it, I think this is, they're open sourcing a lot of that project already. Not just the fact that they're using our library, but the hardware. There's like a bunch of blog posts about how they're developing the hardware, how they're doing the product design, all that sort of stuff. It's quite amazing. Yeah, just how open source, and it's the kinds of stuff that, if you were going to put money on a Bitkey product, and you at least, if you weren't able to audit it yourself, you might want to know that somebody else could audit it and make sure that it was doing what it says it's going to do, for privacy reasons as well as just theft reasons.
There's an interesting note here. I don't know if any of the tech is in there now, but Brink was funding a cryptographer and mathematician named Jesse, who was working on the Frost protocol. And he wrapped up his grant with us doing a lot of the open source research. And lo and behold, that research was appealing to industry, and they hired him. And so he went off to industry to continue to work that expertise that he built in the open source realm in-house, even though I think a lot of the work that he was doing or is doing there was open source still, but there's a little connection with our discussion there.
Yeah, actually, I'd like to chime in directly on that point too, which is open source Bitcoin projects need money, but they also need talented, trained, knowledgeable developers. I would say that is a major limiting force, that all projects, Core is a very complicated system. Every Bitcoin project, there's not a huge cohort of people that know how to write safely and safely contribute to Bitcoin software. So I know this is one of Nifty's pet projects, is training that, training existing developers to be, or even non-developers potentially, I guess, to be Bitcoin developers and Lightning developers. Maybe you can talk Nifty about how that's going, because I know it's a hard problem for all open source projects, mine included. It's, finding the talent.
Yeah, so part of what we're doing at Base 58, I really see it as an opportunity for mostly existing devs. We don't have anything that really targets the new dev ecosystem, so it's definitely on the roadmap maybe someday. But yeah, we're really trying to level up people that have skills in one area, which would be software engineering. across like a variety of different ecosystems and want to really get a start in the Bitcoin ecosystem, I think one of the things about open source, particularly in Bitcoin, might be the same in other ecosystems, but all the code that we're writing and all the different projects that we work on kind of are operating on something that I almost think of as like sort of a layer above of knowledge that's like, well, maybe below the overlying protocol, right? So, you work on BDK, but BDK is doing work, so to speak, on the Bitcoin protocol. So you can get new engineers into BDK that maybe are super Rust experts, etc. But if they don't have that domain specific knowledge about how these protocols are working, what is a Bitcoin transaction? How are signatures work? What is broadcasting? How does the mempool function, etc.? They're not going to be very useful. There's like an entire like knowledge gap, right, about how do these things work. That's kind of where we're really looking to like fill in the gap, so to speak, or produce and provide content that is one, like technically accurate. So we aim to be one of the most accurate and up to date projects or programs that you could come through. We also aim to have, the most hands-on and like applicable stuff where you're kind of the tools we're using, like the languages, the projects, is sort of abstracted away, and you're really just focusing on, okay, what are the parts that are moving? What can you touch? What should you look for? And those skills are the ones then that you're able to bring to any of the other open source projects and have a much better time and much greater success at getting onboarded and figuring out, because you understand kind of like the bigger global objects that all of these like libraries, et cetera, are trying to operate on. So that's kind of like one of the things that we're really focused on at Base 58. And I think you can really see with the people that go through our classes. I know, Steve, you took a Lightning class. You were in our
Yes.
first ever Lightning class, which things have changed a little bit since you're in there. I think we're a little more, well, we were pretty hands-on when you guys went through it,
Yeah.
but
Yeah, and like that was a good example. So I was more knowledgeable about the on-chain protocol stuff, but I didn't know layer 2 is like a whole nother set of protocols, a whole nother set of software mechanisms that you have to understand. That it's there's going to be a little specialization, and people are going to need specialized training. Like you need specialized training to work on core. Like that's why they have Bitcoin. They have the PR review clubs and things like that to like learn how to even review. So beyond the protocol stuff Nifty's teaching, also teaching people how to just even think about like getting into the software to where to look, where the bodies are buried.
One of my favorite moments in Bitcoin is when I asked Peter Woolley, like, what do you think about Lightning? He's like, I don't. So you're like most prominent Bitcoin developer. He's like, no, Lightning. I don't think about it.
Well, I just want to tell a quick story and then continue this brainstorm and not to shill Lisa, but I think it was at the Lightning Summit, and we were hosting the Lightning Summit. Lisa was here. And typically when the bar is called, people run to the drinks and the socialization and so on. Lisa was leading one of these like workshops, and I've never seen it at an event before. They literally, and you got to describe this, Lisa, because I'm going to butcher it because I was not involved. They were all, and Lisa kind of touched on this, but she uses gameplay and actually brings Bitcoin to life in her classes. So can you explain maybe for a couple minutes, like what, basically all like 40 people got up, moved over because we were setting up the bar food station, and they were all connected with rope and had to just like do like a little trot over, which I'll never forget.
yeah, so you're talking about, I always forget about this. So I forget I'm like, we only do dev education. That's not true. We have one project, which is like a classroom size, hands-on, meant for anyone, your friends, your family, your kids, etc. project called the Bitcoin LARP. It stands for live action role play. We did it at the Lightning Summit. We also did it again in Nashville when you guys had a global summit for community leaders. So that was, I think that was in September. But it's incredible. So, I think of myself like, long time builder, engineer, developer. I kind of think of myself more as like I do like engineering, but I also think of it as like content creating, right? Like coming up with new ways to explain things. So really trying to pioneer how do we explain in the most simple, effective way possible to people what's going on with Bitcoin, Lightning, Taproot, etc. Like, we really want to make it such that people can get in and get to be experts as fast and with as little frustration as possible on their side, right? So the LARP really does this, I think, kind of like what we're trying to do with the LARP. Bitcoin is complicated. Like, it's not like any other system, financial, technical, etc., that most people have probably come into contact with before, right? So the LARP is this idea that I had and this sort of realization that for a lot of people, difficult technical systems, you can explain them, you can talk about them, you can show them numbers on a screen and what like hexes look like, etc. But it's not really gonna land with people until you can get their hands on things. They're writing things on paper. They're passing physical objects around and seeing how all these parts fit together. You got to like put people into the environment where they can see all the parts. And then all of a sudden, they start having good questions. They start realizing what's happening. All the stuff that they've seen, maybe through a wallet they've used or what they've heard at talks from going to conferences, all these parts suddenly start falling into place because you give them this like physical built out map where they're actually participating in how it works, like in how Bitcoin works. So the LARP is like a 2-hour long in-person group game, usually about 20 to 40 people. You get them all at tables. It's a group effort, but it's kind of like this team thing where you put people into different groups. Each group becomes a Bitcoin node. We're in a decentralized network, so all of the nodes are kind of competing to find the next block and get it out to the other nodes. You have to send messages across network wires, so you see how that works. You get information from your peers. You can't trust it. You have to verify it before you do anything with it. It's like this very as simple as possible, it's still complicated, not going to sugarcoat it. Yeah, sorry, Rod. I see you're like.
No. I'm just going to speak on Cathie and Yassine's behalf, and this is going to be the next ARC offsite team event. Is going to be Lisa leading a LARP event where we're going to get all the team members together, all tied up and learning.
That'd be fun.
Yeah, it's super fun. It's like great for, it's really kind of built for conferences, for offsites, for classrooms, for meetups. Like, it's just, yeah, it's built for getting groups of people together, like touching Bitcoin, seeing it work, getting their hands dirty on building transactions, etc., and giving people like really accurate, as close to the protocol as possible experience. So when you go out and you actually do Bitcoin other places, you can easily understand where in the bigger picture what you're doing fits. So
Lisa, if I could, in St. Petersburg, Florida, Pinellas County, we have an innovation center for startups, and we would love to attract, Bitcoin-oriented startups. And we have an education foundation using our research, making it age appropriate. I don't know how young you go, but this could be so important, this gamification way of learning. To, we're in the middle schools now, we'll get into the high schools. The earlier, the better, I would imagine.
I mean, I haven't done it with like a middle school group explicitly, but I bet they could do it. Like, I have strong confidence. If they can do simple, basic math, they can punch numbers into a calculator, they can write things onto pieces of cards and set it around. I'm sure they would have like super fun, etc. So I would love to talk more to you about that.
Hey, Cathie, you should mention that it's part of the school curriculum in Pinellas County, and that now, I mean, maybe having a Bitcoin, Bitcoin component of that where it's more interactive. We should follow up after this for sure.
Yeah, we hired educators who could work with you to take ARC's research, make it age appropriate. And the one thing we have not cracked here is Bitcoin yet, because it's pretty daunting to them, right? So it made it age appropriate these educators are having trouble, getting their heads around. I think they'd love to be at one of those tables too. But we've made it age appropriate, and now it has become the science curriculum throughout the county in public schools.
I love this.
Wouldn't that be amazing?
It's amazing, yeah. And honestly, I think learning how Bitcoin works is so great for teaching people about decentralized protocols, right? So it's, you know, Bitcoin is this is one thing I like to say about why I teach Bitcoin exclusively as like a dev thing. There's a lot of different crypto, interesting blockchain projects, but Bitcoin is the granddaddy of all of them. So if you really understand what Bitcoin's doing and decisions that they made around why is it decentralized? Why are blocks every 10 minutes? How do transactions work? All of a sudden, you have this amazing new viewpoint that you can go to almost any other crypto project and you can start understanding the design decisions that they made. Why do they have faster blocks? What, just like you get like this really great kind of like foundational blueprint that lets you better understand decentralized protocols, which are super important in our modern era. How do like computer networks work? What is computer networking? Like, what is crypto? How does that add to like Bitcoin? Why do we use these things? So anyways, yeah, I'm very excited that we could add that to STEM education in schools because I think it's going to really make the students in these classes such better, just like I almost want to say like consumers of the modern age, right? Like they'll really hopefully better understand what's happening in the world that they see online around them, etc. And as soon as you have that understanding, you become so much more powerful in terms of figuring out what you can do to change it, how to contribute and give back. What are the opportunities that you have in terms of building new things, like what's missing. Anyways, I'm like clearly super excited about this.
For middle schoolers and high schoolers, there's a cool factor here, right? A cool factor, which, inspires them at an important point in their lives, right? We're like, this can be a fork in the road time in their lives. So, yeah.
So, Steve, we have a little this is why I love competition. So, St. Petersburg's a little bit ahead of ourselves with the resources and so on. Steve, we got a little work to do.
Yeah, we got to level up that there. I mean, it's good to see. I mean, I like that, that focus on the younger generations, because even though Bitcoin might be smallish now, as it grows, it's going to need more people. Like it's going to need more developers who understand the basics of the protocol. Because not everyone's going to be a developer, but some people will be just to be a product manager or to be a product designer or to be just to get involved in this whole new product category of software and businesses. You're going to need people who understand at least the basics. It's like understanding networking. There's a lot of there's still people today that don't understand the internet, and that like cuts them out of a whole industry. To just understand the basics is important.
Yeah, like as a developer, once you do understand TCP/IP and like once you understand UDP as protocols, it's so much easier to develop. But to me, like really it's great to be part of this group because this is true power of open source. Like when you do have educator like Lisa and then you can work in some way with her or join one of her LARPs and just enjoy the program when you have someone as experienced as Steve as a really a pillar in local community for younger developers, when you have someone like Conor and Mike, like I know how we can solve funding problem for open source super easy. We just like clone Mike Schmidt like in 10 organizations, like 10 brinks, we will be covered. I don't know, Mike, what do you say, Mike?
It sounds like I would be busy. Well, 10 times as busy.
But let me ask this then to the broader group, and that's like maybe a good way to wrap this up because we've been just jamming and this has been so phenomenal. And as I always say, like we need a V2 of this. I get nervous because I think a lot of foundations and a lot of charities, I don't know where my money goes and I don't know what the output is, right? So I get nervous or paralyzed in terms of like supporting. With you guys, I could text you. I know exactly what's happening. The proof of work is there, like with Lisa, Mike, Conor, Rockstar, and Steve. Like, what is the best way to support you guys, like an average person, an average pleb like me, can help support you guys?
to turn the question slightly, I guess it's more about supporting the open source projects that are creating the software that maybe you're using. Is maybe another way to frame it. I think, there's a number of different ways. I think one thing we're a big proponent of is we tend to support projects like in a very early stage where like a developer just has an idea on how to improve Bitcoin security, privacy, scalability, design. And then we provide like the initial, let's say, seed round funding to get them up and running until they get to a point where they kind of establish some form of community. And that's where you might find yourself slowly entering the fray and trying to contribute, whether it be to the project, even if you're not a developer. It might just be advocacy of the project. It might be writing documentation. It might be raising awareness. It might be creating content, until such a point where that community has built up enough reputation in the wider ecosystem to now get to a place where it's vital for some business need, it's vital for some end user need, and they then feel compelled to contribute maybe financially to that project. And then you start seeing multiple entities now start to see the real value in the project. And then maybe a project can crystallize that and make receiving donations easier by creating a foundation like what you have done, Steve, with BDK, or the Bitcoin design community have done with their design efforts and a Bitcoin design foundation. Because individuals, like you just said, Rod, individuals or even large institutions maybe don't have the capacity to do all the due diligence that maybe we have at a Spiral or a Block, where we've got a big legal team, a big tax team. We are able to do very deep due diligence on individuals. Now, once a project's got to that stage where they have their own foundation, they've built up reputation, they're well known in the space, they have this legal entity, which makes it easier to receive donations now. I think that sets a nice stage for sustainability over the longer term. And the very nature of open source means that you can understand what's going on in the project. You know, if Steve hasn't made any commits in BDK for 3 years, we can see it, right? So
it's all in the open.
it's all in the open, right? I'm only messing Steve, but I think that's an interesting way to think about it from both a user of the technology and someone who's looking at it from a business perspective as well.
Rod, I would say to you, or I guess anyone else listening, that this is a voluntary movement. And in order to garner support, whether that's contributors to the project or designers or funders to contribute financially, I've found that awareness is key. And making sure people are aware of these projects, aware that these things don't just code themselves, that there's opportunities there and that there's a need there. And I find that, this discussion itself, the B word that we put on Yassine and Cathie a year or two ago, those sorts of things raise awareness, and the people who get it and take that awareness into initiative, there's more of those than you think. And if we can cast a wider awareness net, I think you get the developers, you get the designers, you get the money as well.
I'll throw out too, maybe not necessarily for all the plebs, but for the people that work in enterprises or the people that have their own businesses to, learn about Bitcoin and learn about the open source projects that are available out there. And not just as a potential technology, but as a potential, like you may not have the people in-house that can do it, but look to those open source projects. I would love to see a model where people come from industry into open source. Maybe they start as a volunteer, they might get a grant, a part-time, full-time grant, and then may go back to industry. I would love to see this kind of circle of people coming in and out of open source, potentially working for a company. So maybe you have somebody in your company who's really interested in Bitcoin and open source. Give them 20% time or 50% time, or give them some percentage of their time to go work on open source as an employee would be amazing. or bring in training into your company to grow the team's knowledge. But I'd love to see more businesses, and this may be for like startups probably listen to this podcast. If you're a startup, don't go try to roll your own. Like, learn about the other projects that are there, and there might be something out there, very likely something out there that you can that there already exists that is open source and follows the best practices and standards, that you can just incorporate in, and it'll actually accelerate your project, whatever you're doing. So just invite people to do that.
Yeah, it's absolutely like that, because when you do look at Spiral as an entity in Block, like the value that Block derives from Spiral as a research team, as like even a marketing effort, because when I spoke with Dorsey, he was very clear that he started Spiral as a way to offset that corporateness of Block. It's like an interesting way how he was looking at that. But just as a research team, the value is incredible. And I always come back to maybe two things. Like, number one, Bitcoin had this unique funding model for a lot of developers. Is like, if you were early on and you managed to acquire enough Bitcoin, like, you literally could live off of that and contribute to the protocol. Unfortunately, like, that's not possible now. See, Lisa is already getting upset with me. But this is where I would go, like, in a second thing, which is like fundraising. Raising funds is a skill. And it's a skill that's not really well distributed amongst developers. Like, it's very rare. And what I love seeing, especially in the last few years, is development of this infrastructure so that uh, people that understand the value of freedom tech and like in Bitcoin, they can donate to these entities. And not only like individual, like me and Steve, we spoke about how BTCPay server has a foundation in Japan. Then Steve started 501c3 here in the US. But there are now entities like OpenSats, which can really be helpful for those projects that don't have anything, and even can, those projects can get to the point where they can communicate with the rest of us, and we can give them a playbook. Like, how do you do this? Because at the end of the day, uh, a lot of people are creating value, and like, we need to figure out a way how to raise awareness, as Steve was saying, like, raise awareness and make sure that all the good things that are being developed in Bitcoin are not like profitable, but they're sustainable, and that people keep being developed as we develop technology as well.
Actually, I want to add one more thing on that, which is that a little money, like, money is important, and it's sometimes not for expected reasons. Like, I was an enterprise developer. When I got my first grant from Spiral, it wasn't so much the money, it was the confidence they were putting in me to quit my day job. Like, they were saying, yes, you can do this. It's that moral support. Even a part-time grant or a bounty given to a developer working in industry might be enough to just say, hey, you can do this. and then that starts their whole open source career. So I really think it a little goes a long way.
It changed my life, Steve.
I agreed. Me too.
No, man, you're so right, because when Spiral gave that 100K to BTCPay server back in 2019, we were so happy. We were like, it's that vote of confidence.
Makes a big difference.
Yeah, absolutely.
I had three quick things that, for people who are outside that want to give back or kind of like help move this space forward. My first, they're all going to be like self-serving, so that's fine. But my first one is I think you should invest in yourself, in your knowledge of Bitcoin. Maybe that's by signing up to take a Base 58 class. We've got some online classes. We do in-person classes. Maybe that's signing up to take a dev course so you better understand what's going on with the tech stuff that Bitcoin is built on. But I think investing in your own understanding is really good for the entire community and the network, because it makes everyone who participates a more informed, like, participant and like stakeholder in this project that is like the Bitcoin open source network. My second one is that if you want to donate to a team or a project, the OpenSats is always happy, one, to accept donations to our general fund or to any of the listed projects. if you have a project and you want to apply for a grant out of our open fund or get your project listed on the website, you should check that out. And then the last one is the Bitcoin LARP that we've been talking about. We're currently doing a Geyser Fund campaign. It's kind of like a Kickstarter, but it's Bitcoin only. What we're trying to do is build the first 50 copies of the LARP kit. So up until now, there's only been one. It's been one that I spent maybe $1,000 building myself, trying to pull the parts together. It took a lot of friends chipping in to kind of make it happen, etc. We want to scale it. We want to get these out into more communities and meetups. So we're trying to raise money to build 50 that we would then send to any community meetup, etc., that fills out an application. So if you're a community and you want to try and get one of these first 50, look on the Geyser Fund. There's a form you can fill out to get in line for one of the ones that we build. And then we would love some funds to kind of help meet our goal.
So just to continue on that with Lisa, I'm going to play the role of follow-up. I play no developer skills. And by the way, it's a shame, and maybe V2, Conor, we should talk about the Bitcoin design community, because I will just give you guys a plug real quick. We've been talking about developers, Cathie, and you've seen so much in this brainstorm, but there's also so many other ways to contribute to Bitcoin. I will say selfishly is like simply you can just host a meetup like we've been doing in Nashville, St. Pete's, the Tampa Bay Bitcoin community is amazing. Those folks come up to Nashville quite a bit. You could just host a meetup. But then if you're a designer and you're like, what can I do to contribute back to Bitcoin? There's a whole open source design community. Maybe Conor, maybe just explain the Bitcoin design community and then I can wrap.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's no secret that the user experience in Bitcoin can oftentimes be quite rough. And we're trying to figure out ways to move in a direction where there are more seamless experiences. We initially thought it makes sense to hire a single designer and have them solely focus on trying to tackle many of the UX challenges we see in Bitcoin. But we opted to be the catalyst for a whole community of designers who are focused on tackling some of these issues. One of the flagship projects that community works on is something called the Bitcoin Design Guide, which is a set of principles for product teams to build out really slick user experiences that are Bitcoin focused. You can find that at bitcoin.design. But it's not just product and UX effort. It's also artistic endeavors as well. So there's a lot of artists in there who are contributing by way of art and culture and things of that nature. So yeah, if you are a designer or a copywriter, for example, there is equally as important as well. There are kind of different ways you can contribute, and they've just made the leap by creating their own foundation as well. So they're moving in a really good direction as well. So bitcoin.design for anyone who's in that way inclined.
Amazing. Cathie, I'm going to be following up because we got a lot of action items from this. This is the power of these brainstorms. Like a lot of things just happen. I'll speak on behalf of Lisa. I'm going to help her follow up on this LARP idea, which I absolutely love. I just want to thank everybody for an amazing Bitcoin brainstorm. I'm inspired. I get inspired by all of y'all. And we will link to each of your projects in the show notes. I don't know if Cathie, you had anything else that you'd like to mention?
Well, I, like you and like Yassine, we've talked about this. I'm always so inspired by what we do learn here. And, I'd love to follow up with Rockstar and Illy at some point and talk about this open source versus closed, because Yassine mentioned about projects that are so important, like Bitcoin, a global monetary system. What about artificial general intelligence as a concept? And do you want closed source or open source as we're moving in that direction?
Yeah, absolutely. I have a lot of thoughts on that. As someone, again, like even in Bitcoin and payments, I worked on open source with BTCPay server. With Strike, it was closed source. Have a lot of thoughts, but really, I can just echo what all of you are saying. For me, it's amazing that we can come together like this, collaborate through open source. And then for others, people watching this, just the fact that you, Rod, are going to follow up with action items, because there are a lot of people in the world that really want to support freedom tech. They want to, even when it comes to their time, their money, their attention, they want to help build a world that's sustainable and better and improve the technology. And it really can only be done through open source. So glad we had this talk.
That's amazingly well said. And I think that's a great place to wrap. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Rod. Thank you, everyone.
ARK believes that the information presented is accurate and was obtained from sources that ARK believes to be reliable. However, ARK does not guarantee the accuracy or completeness of any information, and such information may be subject to change without notice from ARK. Historical results are not indications of future results. Certain of the statements contained in this podcast may be statements of future expectations and other forward-looking statements that are based on ARK's current views and assumptions, and involve known and unknown risks and uncertainties that could cause actual results, performance, or events to differ materially from those expressed or implied in such statements.